Thank you so much. I just wanted to begin by thanking the Art Basel Hong Kong team, everyone who's already been mentioned, and the others for really making this possible. Good morning. My name is Mustafa. I'm Senior Curator and Head of Exhibitions at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi Project. And really, it's such a pleasure to be here with the wonderful Ho Tzu Nyen. I'll refer to him as Zhu, because often that's how he's referred to by friends and colleagues in the field. And I just wanted to kind of begin with a few introductory remarks, because Tzu Nyen's work has really been at the forefront of how we think about the image broadly. And having followed his practice over the past, my gosh, close to 2 decades, it's kind of really been operating at the intersections of history, technology, and something that we later came to call the machinic. And in a sense, I think I just wanted to kind of begin by acknowledging that this is the latest work and is proudly presented on the M Facade. So for those of you who haven't been, please go there. And also congratulations to Tzu Nyen and the entire team at M and the curators who've really made this possible. But I think also to say that this latest work sits within a much broader arc of other, if I may say, critically acclaimed works. And we'll try and touch on these works as we go along. The Nameless, for instance, Hotel Aporia, fondly known by many as part of the Japan trilogy. It's not a term that Tzu Nyen came up with, but it kind of began to be recognized as such. And of course, the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia. And so these were really kind of landmark works, really major contributions to the field in the last 10 to 15 years. And perhaps I also wanted to kind of speak a little bit about the machinic, as I mentioned it earlier, because the machinic is not mechanical. As I came to understand it in Tzu Nyen's work. I mean, it's really a dense network of relationships in which the body, something that will come up as we go along, multiple bodies, as Tzu Nyen calls it, will become kind of entwined into the conversation, but also how, to use an older word, ideology and technology kind of also continuously, narrate the way we see the world today. And in a sense, I think it's important to recognize, and very much so with Night Charades as well, that this is not a closed circuit, but it's extremely porous. And we'll come back to the question of porosity as we go along, especially when we start speaking about artificial intelligence, which has become quite a buzzword also of late. But also how, in a sense, certain algorithmic logics have operated in Tzu Nyen's work, if I may say, right from the early days. And with regards to this, for me, a key reference point, a key turning point within the field of contemporary art was the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia, which to this day, and anyone can visit it, it's actually cdosea.org. It's a live algorithm that is continuously reshuffling content on what we sometimes refer to as Southeast Asia, within quotes, a region that has never truly been integrated by one single marker, across language and various performative acts, to even questions on how history itself is remembered, recalled, and even disturbed, or challenged. And so I think I just wanted to say that a lot of the conversations that you're also going to hear are part of a much longer conversation that I've been having with Tzu Nyen, alongside all my wonderful co-curators, who worked tirelessly to bring together Tzu Nyen's Mid-Career Survey Show, which launched in 2023 at the Singapore Art Museum, Title Time, and the Tigers. I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that I'm very much resting on the work of my very generous and incredible colleagues at various institutions. And this is also very important. The M Plus Facade, Night Charades, is not the only exhibition that Tzu Nyen is having. He's also having a solo exhibition at Kiang Malang, interestingly titled 3 Stories, Monsters, Opium, and Time. 3 very important aspects that very much intersect and speak to contemporary Hong Kong and its past, if one may say that. So, what we're going to try and do is oscillate in this conversation over the next 45 minutes or so between past works and Night Charades. And so, in a sense, try and tease out certain intricate connections, but also where Night Charades kind of departs or diverges, so to speak. And I'm going to begin with a very a straightforward question, if you want to call it that. Night Charades. So why charades, and why the night?
Yeah, thank you, Mus, and thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for having me here. So I'll jump straight into it.
Let's go.
On the title, Night Charades. Well, first of all, the work is on the M Plus Facade, and it's only activated at night. So, I suppose that explains the first part of the title. But I would say darkness is usually something quite critical for me, since I work usually with projections. And of course, when I first visited Hong Kong in preparation of the work, we looked at the screen from the opposite shore at night. So the screen amongst the beautiful night lights of Hong Kong, with the lights reflecting off the waters. So for me, night was an important component of it. And charades, I would say, one of the practical, pragmatic reasons for that is that the work is, in some ways, one of the conditioning parameters is the absence of sound. And sound has always been a critical part of my works for those who know my past works. So this was immediately a big challenge for me, like producing a video work that has no sound. I would say when I was invited to make the work by M+, the first idea that I had, and which has continued to stick, was about Hong Kong cinema. Basically, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s in Singapore, and Hong Kong cinema was very much sort of the air we breathe. My mother is Cantonese, and so even back home as a kid, when I wasn't allowed to watch TV, I could hear the sounds from the Hong Kong television series that my family was watching. Yeah, watching Hong Kong films was very much part of our family life. So thinking about the screen and thinking about this location of Hong Kong, I immediately thought I had to do something about my own relationship with Hong Kong movies. So that's kind of the basic starting point when I decided to kind of basically select 50 iconic scenes from Hong Kong films that were burnt very deeply into my mind, and to find a way to reenact these scenes using AI as an intermediary. So when you are reenacting scenes from a film in silence, that brings us to the charade, which is a game that we often play together with friends and family in the privacy of our homes. So it's interesting that now we are playing a charade generated by AI, but transmitted in the most public of spaces. So I would say this was, some of the starting points in thinking about the title.
And so, just to ask you, just as you narrated the initial impulses for the work, in a sense, there are two temporalities operating here, right? There is one of a childhood narrated through encounters with these iconic films and scenes, to be more precise, and then the very public dimension of the work as it is presented today. And can you speak a little bit about this?
Thank you for the question. Actually, a charade is a very interesting and very interesting act if we think about it in terms of temporality. So a charade, I would say, always operates in two different times, at least. When you are performing a charade, you are sort of referring to a past performance, which is the original source from which one derives the charade. So there is always a dimension which sort of heads towards the past. But when you are actually performing the charade in the present, that activates a second type of time, which is the presentness of the performance itself at the moment. So these kind of splitting temporality is something that I'm interested in, especially to cite this work in such a public space, and in some ways I imagine that the work produces at least two different types of audiences. For example, the first group we can imagine people like me who have childhood or memories of these films. And then there is a second group of public which may be foreign to these original films. So I also thought that it was interesting for public artwork to generate different types of public, rather than for a public artwork in a sense to unify the public or to speak to one public. It's interesting for me to think of multiple types of audiences.
And I have to ask, the early works, I just flashed up stills from one or several tigers, and it's followed by, of course, stills from Night Charades. And in a sense, one or several tigers, if you think of it as a machine, generated or kind of reorganized, right? Memory with history, with myth, with encounters even, right? A bit like what Night Charades does as well. I mean, a charade is an encounter of some kind. But the difference here is, with the latest work, that there is the component of AI. And I'm curious, Zhu, because this is also the first time that you're working with this. And I just want to know, is AI a kind of a collaborator, a mirror, or is it much more unruly in that sense, if I can use that phrase?
Yeah, so this is actually my first engagement with AI. I've always thought that I would engage with AI eventually, but I never thought this was the moment. And over the last weeks, running into many other colleagues and fellow artists, and we were chatting by AI, and I found that was quite a common sentiment amongst many moving image makers, that everyone thinks that AI is something we eventually need to engage with, but maybe now is not quite the moment. So that's quite a common sentiment. So I would say with Night Charades, I found myself plunged into this new technology. And you mentioned the options of a collaborator or a mirror and something much more unruly. I would say in many ways, with AI, all three modes are possible. So it really depends on our specific approach to the technology and the process. But I would say ultimately for me, maybe I would introduce a fourth term, which is for me, it's a generator. So AI is a kind of a machine for me, that generates differences, generates multiplicities. So for anyone who had any kind of like experience with AI, at this stage of the technology, at least, in terms of using AI to generate images, one finds that it's very impossible to produce something very specific. You know, so if you have a very specific image in mind, at this moment, using AI, it's kind of, I would say, barking up the wrong tree. So the imperfections of the AI technology at this moment only produces divergence, it produces glitches, it produces surprises. So in that sense, it is a kind of collaborator, but a collaborator that one doesn't have kind of a control over. So I would say, for me, one of the great things about this process was exactly finding a way to use this flow, this technology, while giving up any attempts at mastery. You know, but this doesn't mean leaving it entirely to chance, but kind of finding a way to serve, I would say, this uncertainty, and to, I would say, in a way, to kind of rely on our intuition to think through these glitches, accidents, and somehow using the glitches and the accidents to push the work beyond, you know, what my limited imagination can offer. So I would say for me, it's a kind of opening to something else, to the outside.
Just a follow-up question to that, and I cannot help but kind of perhaps draw a comparison between one or several tigers, which kind of looked at very much the formation of the Singapore story, if you want to call it that, right? Where there is a moment in the 19th century where a land surveyor by the name, a British land surveyor by the name of G.D. Coleman is attempting to open up the inland rainforests of Singapore, and his party is met with a tiger. And this is captured in a print by a German engraver years later. But in the print, there is a kind of a twist, a kind of an irony, because it turns out that the tiger was not interested in attacking G.D. Coleman or his party of convict labor, Indian convict labor. The tiger was, in fact, interested in attacking the theodolite, the machine that is, in fact, used to survey and build roads. But sort of, that's just the background. But I wanted to sort of ask, in that scene, you have, for instance, and I can bring it up here, the word tiger, and the tiger, and G.D. Coleman, and they are, in a sense, archetypes. When you started working for Night Charades with AI, Hong Kong film, is it, as a data set, an archetype or a stereotype? Like, I want to know how, or can you even differentiate anymore between the two?
Thank you. That's a great question that I've been. I would say straight off that I don't really have a precise answer, but that it's something which oscillates between a stereotype and an archetype. So I would say, you know, when you use these existing AI platforms, each of these different platforms have their own fixed data sets. So every platform, in a way, has its own characteristics. It has its own, which is to also say it has its own limitations. It has its own blind spots, but it also has its own set of possibilities. And I would say with my first encounters with these platforms, much of the data set, in my very first engagement with it, I would say one is faced with a stream of stereotypes, because when you're thinking about this collection of data that forms the data sets, much of it is drawn from kind of common sort of pop culture, what is readily available. And these are often reduced, I would say, to stereotypes. So for example, certain platforms, I won't mention the specific names. So when you try to key in prompts such as Asian man, these days, usually the figure that emerges looks very Korean, you know. So I must say, with the dominance of Korean pop culture these days, they have kind of like occupied the data sets. So part of in our process, what we were struggling against was like, you know, how to transform some of these Asian faces to open it up, you know, to the rest of Asia.
To a broader spectrum.
Yeah, to a broader spectrum, exactly. So yes, it's, and I would say, you know, I would say that Hong Kong cinema, to me, this encounter between Hong Kong cinema and these type of broad, aggregated data set was very interesting because I find that with Hong Kong cinema, there is something extremely local and specific to it, which I would say runs counter to these kind of large aggregated data sets, which comes close to the stereotypes. So, but Hong Kong cinema, with its kind of very unique blend of romance, of the farcical, of like low humor, you know, and sort of meshing that with these broad kind of like stereotypes for me, creates a very interesting mixture. For me, it does something to disrupt this otherwise very smooth flow of stereotypical images, because the Hong Kong films are just so strange in a way. Yeah.
Even action sequences.
Yeah, I mean, action sequences, of course, you know, when we think about Hong Kong cinema, action sequences is one of the key scenes that we have to engage with. So for those of you who are like familiar with John Woo's films, you know, the great action director, he has like I think in the early John Woo films, there is a kind of iconic scene where we have the great actor Chow Yun-fat sort of leaping into mid-air and firing two pistols at the same time. I found that there's even been a term for it, for that move. It's called the leaping double pistols move, you know. And but that was, I think, subsequently appropriated by much Hollywood films. So you see this kind of like in The Matrix subsequently. So for me, it was interesting to take this kind of strange, you know, very original inventions of Hong Kong cinema, and to, yeah, like, you know, create an encounter between that and these type of ready-made existing data sets on AI, which tends to generate very smooth images that looks almost very slick and that comes close to advertising. But kind of mixing that with Hong Kong cinema was kind of one of my starting points.
So in a sense, the use of AI in this instance encourages multiplicity, right? And this has been consistent with your works right from the start, if we think about it, all the way back to last 2 decades.
Yeah, the question of multiplicity is a great one, and I would say that is another one of my main, you know, fascination with AI. So because of this inability to produce something exact and precise with AI, what you end up with are just versions. So there's no longer one true version, but only multiple renders. So I think this is very much something very different from what we would imagine as the traditional form of thinking about auteur cinema. So kind of, you know, when we think about the great directors, it's, you know, usually someone who has a very specific scene in mind, which must be filmed from a very specific and precise angle. And during the editing process, one would choose the one most perfect take. and you would assemble this on one single timeline. So when you use an editing software, there's always one single timeline, and one would assemble the best perfect shots in the one single best perfect sequence. So everything leads to this notion of the one. And I think through my works, I would say something that runs through all of my works, in a sense, is a certain kind of refusal of the one. So what interests me today is the refusal of the timeline. And for me, that means the production of multiple possible timelines. So prior to the Night Charades, when I was using AI, one work that you had mentioned was the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia. And as you had already explained, it's a work that is constantly reconfigured by an algorithm. Because in many ways, I don't think there is one narrative that can unify Southeast Asia. But at the same time, if I think about the concept of Southeast Asia as a generator, what it generates is multiple possible understandings and timelines. So even before using an AI process, I suppose this was always kind of where I was headed into this sort of search for multiplicity. Yeah. And actually thinking further back, you mentioned the Nameless. And the Nameless was in many ways a much more traditional video. It was made with only one single timeline. But the Nameless is a work about an actual historical figure. His name, actually one of his 50 known names is Lai Tik. So he was a triple agent who was also the leader of the Malayan Communist Party, and he was a secret agent for the British, the French, and the Japanese. So this subject himself is multiplicity. So even when I was operating with just a single timeline, I think there was something in the way that I was working, or the subjects that fascinated me were those that didn't allow for this reduction into one. So I think in some ways there is a kind of natural progression in this search for multiplicity. Yeah.
And just to kind of intervene here, because the Nameless uses found footage, right? And with Night Charades too. So the footage holds personal, as you've shared, but also broadly cultural and popular significance. So how do you navigate, Nyen, between the kind of classical dilemma, right? Is it homage or is it subversion, right? Or are both possible simultaneously now?
Thank you. Just to give a little bit of context, the Nameless was assembled entirely from the filmography of the great Hong Kong actor Tony Leung. So I used his films over the last 2.5 decades and reassembled them into a new narrative about this triple agent. So in that sense, even at the Nameless has a dual kind of temporality, which is something I mentioned about the charade earlier. So when one is watching the Nameless, for people who have memories of these original films from which the clips are derived, one is drawn, in a sense, towards the horizon of the past. Your memories and emotions related to the original films when you first encountered them. Then there is a second temporality, which is the temporality of the present, of the Nameless narrative, which is about these triple agents. Yeah. So I would say this is always sort of something that kind of like coexisted for me. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something you said right at the start, because essentially for Night Charades, you expect sort of two types of publics, right? One that is familiar with the films and can recall. The second, who may not be familiar with this. And can you speak a little bit more about this, and also, in a sense, how a lot of the images that we're seeing also on the screen start to almost mimic the viewer, right? Because a lot of these kind of AI generators are kind of mimicking what's already out there. So how do you kind of move between the two? I hope the question is clear, sort of.
So in a sense, I think what you are saying is that the AI itself is a kind of an audience, right?
Yeah.
That it reads these original materials and it interprets them in its own way. So I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it, and I guess it poses the question then of like, what of the actual real human audience, right? Does the AI as an audience in a way duplicates the human audience? Yeah. Does it make the human audience in some sense redundant? Yeah. So did I understand?
Because it could be its own audience effectively, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question, and but I would be a little bit more optimistic, about this. For me, there is always an outside. So if the AI now, in a sense, duplicates what we currently imagine is the human audience, then I would say the real human audience would evolve into a different type of audience. So for me, every process, like every work of art, always generates an outside. And in a sense, this faith, this hope that there is always an outside is in a sense what keeps me going as an artist. For me, art is a certain kind of intuition about what is the outside. But I also wanted to maybe circle back a little bit to your earlier question about found footage. This notion of, in a sense, the ready-made. Yeah. So I would say what is found to me is not only just the image as a material, but the found and the ready-made is also the audience's own memories and emotions related to these materials, right? So what we are activating is not just the image from the past, but also each of our own separate set of memories, which conditions how we engage with the image. But maybe I just want to push that a little bit further. Actually, for me, I would say, no matter what kind of processes we are using, we are always dealing with some kind of found materials. So when one confronts, I would imagine when I look at a blank screen, the screen is not really blank, but it's supercharged with every film that has ever been made. So that already exists in a blank screen. So we could also change the analogy to a blank canvas. So for me, there is never a blank canvas because the entire history of art is in that canvas, right? It conditions how we imagine. Yeah. So in the same sense that even as we are speaking now through language, language is a found, ready-made system. So we are always simultaneously kind of engaging with things that have come before us, right? So you said homage or subversion, and that kind of makes me think a little bit about what an American literary critic, Harold Bloom, he has a very interesting concept, which is the anxiety of influence. He says a poet first imagines he, she, or they could write a poem only after they have encountered a prior poem, right? So, the later poet, in many ways, writes a poem only because they have been so deeply affected by an earlier poem that has come before. So I believe that applies in many ways to all artists, right? Like we set about on this journey of making art only because we've been affected by something that came before us. And this relationship is always a fraught one, you know. And I would say there's always something of the homage in it, but there's also always the struggle for originality. So I would say homage and subversion comes together in this relationship.
As we were viewing the work a few days ago, just across at the Hong Kong harbour, you mentioned something to me, but we couldn't finish the conversation because somebody else came in and broke the train of thought. But you mentioned something about wind dynamics and moving cloth. Can you speak a little bit about it? Because we included this image from Night Charades. Yeah.
I would say wind and cloth became an obsession for me while working on AI, on the AI processes. So those of you who have any kind of like experience with 3D animation, you will know that like wind moving across fabric or moving your hair is like the most difficult thing to achieve in 3D. It's like the most expensive images to render, because basically the computer requires great computing power to calculate, you know, how every strand of hair is moving in the wind. But when I started using AI, I found that this generation was, in a sense, like automatic. You know, you no longer have to spend like kind of enormous amount of resources to generate these type of images. So that became one way in which I started to think about the form of these images, of these characters. So all of the characters in Night Charades are dressed in this clothing, which are full of pleats and folds. And all of these images are slightly slowed down to amplify this movement of cloth in this artificially generated wind. So this was, in a sense, how I also started thinking about the rhythm of this work. So I mentioned earlier that one of the great challenges of this work was the absence of sound. So usually sound and music is how what we use to help generate a sense of rhythm. But now that I'm devoid of sound and music, I wanted to find a different way to express rhythms. And using these kind of folds and cloth was kind of the solution I arrived at. But I would also say that I've always been a big fan of like the painting of drapery. In like kind of Renaissance to Baroque paintings. So like, for example, some of the great paintings of Caravaggio with this, against this black stark background, high contrast lighting, and also volumes of cloth. So I would say the cloth almost became a character for me in Night Charades. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of shift a little bit and ask you, because you've never been loyal to a single medium. You're also a writer in many ways, right? And we've gathered your writings over the years. But I wanted to ask you, this is something you remarked just as we were preparing for this conversation, in terms of how much of a shift is AI. Vis-a-vis, let's say, photography, for instance. You know, whenever we think about mediums, art historically, this question has emerged. You know, it's not a new question. It continues and recurs, right? A lot like the archetypes in your works, they recur. Can you speak a little bit more about this, Zhu? Because I think there's a lot of thinking at the moment. You know, there's a lot of questions surrounding it. What are the early thoughts? Having worked on this in the first instance.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, what an image looks like is always as important as how the image is generated, how it is displayed. Even if how it is generated and displayed might sometimes be invisible to the audience eye, but for me, they hold equal importance in the artwork. And very often, what the work looks like eventually is, in many ways, tied to how they are generated. Yeah, but for this question of like, in a sense, what is this break? What is this rupture that AI has brought about in the moving image? I would say that basically for me, AI changes not just the way we produce and consume images. For me, it changes the very nature and essence of what is an image. You mentioned photography earlier, and of course, photo means light, and graphy is writing. So photography was a writing of light. In its original form, it was light that was inscribed onto film at the direct moment of the opening of the shutter and the aperture. When the way that we made images, I would say, kind of underwent a big shift when we started using digital technology. So there is no longer this direct imprint of light. Theoretically, we refer to this direct imprint of light as like the indexical print. So when digital technology emerged in image making, this relationship to the direct inscription of light became much more complex. So now light is no longer directly written on a negative. It is immediately translated into ones and zeros in a data form. But at least there is still that kind of initial opening to light. And I would say that we could possibly define AI images as images generated without light. Because now you no longer need the lens, you no longer need that opening to the outside, but the process of generating AI images is somehow kind of almost embryonic. It sort of exists within its own sphere. So for me, this is an entirely new condition of image making. And as an artist, I'm kind of like, I feel like for myself at least, it's almost a kind of duty to sense this kind of shift in the technological processes of how images are made, and also to see if one could swerve them to do something else than what they are commonly used for.
I have to ask, a lot of the work, the past works, have also been, in a sense, about sidestepping the lens and the camera, almost anti-cinematic, but you continue to kind of claim the space as a filmmaker. Can you speak a little bit about this, I think, for the audience, so that this absence of light in AI, to me, is very consistent in terms of how you've been progressing. So I think this leap to AI is, in fact, not a leap at all, but just a natural progression from my point of view, knowing your practice, but perhaps quickly, Nyen, how to kind of capture this. Yeah.
I suppose I started making works with a camera and a lens, so much more in the mode of, I suppose, a traditional filmmaker. But it has always troubled me that the references I had in my mind in thinking about moving images was kind of the great directors of the 60s, to the 80s. Yeah. In many ways, for me, they remain unsurpassable in how far they pushed cinema, which is the great art form of the industrial era. So when you have a film strip, it's like one image after another. Similar in logic to an assembly line, which is the logic of the Industrial Revolution. But when I started making moving image works, I could never ever afford using film. So in Singapore, it's difficult to have access to film and film cameras. So I was always working with digital processors. So it disturbed me that my aesthetic criteria came from these aesthetics of the past, but yet the technology I was using was something else because it was digital, right? So, so even though I worked with the lens up to almost 2011, I think 2011, when I made The Cloud of Unknowing, that was kind of my last lens-based work. I decided after 2011 to not make a work with a camera anymore. So in a sense, giving myself a certain kind of like restriction in order to see what can come out of that voluntary restriction. Yeah. So I started working a lot with found footage. So footage that are found means that these source materials are already digital in form when I first used them. And I also sort of simultaneously started exploring animation. So animation, is images that you could generate without the lens. And I would say, actually, if I think back about the origins of cinema, the photographic and animation, actually, they coexisted kind of at the beginnings of cinema. But somehow the photographic, I would say, kind of dominated our attention. And so I suppose this is kind of, as you mentioned, a gradual kind of like transition, So while I was exploring animation, I also started exploring algorithmic editing systems as a way to refuse this single timeline. So I started exploring all the possible ways in which one can generate images without the camera. So I suppose AI is sort of the latest in this journey.
We have about 10 minutes, and I think I have a couple of last questions. One is, and this is sort of part of the conversation so far, is that as I came to relate to Night Charades and read about it and also encounter it in the person, I thought and very much think that Night Charades is about layered processes and ambiguity rather than clear authorship. And at this moment in time, as you know, there is a lot of, let's say, speculation around AI, questions around authorship, right? There's a lot of anxiety around the technology too, right? From various quarters, journalistic, artistic, whatever it may be. Can you speak a little bit about this? However superficial the thoughts may be at this stage.
I would say straight off that authorship was never something I'm particularly troubled by. Not just the authorship of others, but I don't really have a very strong sense of myself as like an author, like an originator. Yeah, I see myself just as a channel where things pass through. So the past works done by others pass through me. So I'm just simply a node in this long, continuous, endless stream of
storytellers,
of storytelling, of image making. Yeah. So I suppose maybe that kind of like already explains quite a bit of like my relationship to the past, right? But at the same time, the past is always a horizon that stays with me. So for example, if we think about the AI as a transformative process, so transforming these original Hong Kong films into something new. For me, it's interesting to think about transformation not as a rejection of the past, but as a kind of embodiment of everything that has come before you and bringing it, funneling it into the present and hopefully, doing our small modest bits in pushing that like into the future. So a transformation for me always is a kind of embodiment of everything that has come before.
From the meta, I guess, to something more specific, this scene in particular, in Night Charades or from Night Charades, something's happening here. Can you speak a little bit about this, because this relationship between the finger and the nostril. Maybe we'll end on this note.
What a slide to end our talk on.
Just throw it in there.
This must have been like one of the first scenes that came to my mind when I started to think about this project. So this came from the great films of Stephen Chow, the great Hong Kong filmmaker and comedian. Many people of like my generation, like friends, when we think about Stephen Chow, this scene is always close at hand. So basically, in many of his films, there's always a character. He would usually start framing this character from the back, and you would imagine that it's like a really beautiful woman. And when this character turns around, he's usually has a beard, and he's like, basically digging his nose. So this is kind of what I meant by the originality of like Hong Kong cinema, which is kind of like it's courage in dealing with the low and the farcical. So I immediately, when I thought about doing AI, I immediately thought it would be great to have the AI reenact these scenes. But what the AI does is, of course, it creates all these sleek-looking figures that resemble models that you might see in advertising. So I just wanted this absolute contrast between the form of the figure as well as the act. Mm-hmm. It's a strange place to end our conversation.
But please join me in thanking the incredible Ho Tzu Nyen. And just to conclude with, again, many congratulations also to colleagues at M+ for really, making this possible, and to everyone at Art Basel Hong Kong for bringing us all together this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you.